Hi, and welcome back to the White Noise Podcast. Today you're joined by Skye and Lyanna as usual, and in this episode we'll be talking about true crime documentaries. We'll most likely be discussing the cases in the documentaries for the sake of context, but this episode specifically is going to be about the growing trend, or probably a better word would be obsession, with true crime documentaries and how we're becoming desensitized to the material. And I think we're just going to jump in with one of the better examples and currently the most topical, The Vanishing at the Seesaw Hotel. Lyanna, your thoughts?
You aced it.
Why do you talk way too fast?
No, don't be silly. So the Cecil Hotel, obviously I watched earlier this week, after your suggestion when we decided to do this topic. I hadn't really cared too much about it before deciding.
How much did you know before you actually went into it?
So I already knew a lot about the Cecil Hotel because, like a million other people, I researched the shit out of it after watching American Horror Story Hotel.
Yeah.
So I already knew about it. So I thought, I'm not interested in watching just a rehash. And I'm kind of a bit bored of true crime now, as I think we both probably are a bit. And I don't know, I went in expecting not very much. Kind of received not very much. I was a bit bored. It had some good intentions, unlike some other stuff that we'll be talking about. But I would say I was just underwhelmed.
I think the main reason I wanted to talk about this one like at the beginning, and we'll probably also keep referring back to it as maybe like the example, is because we were just talking the other day and we realized like some of the more difficult to watch true crime documentaries, and how as we've gotten older we've almost becoming desensitized, if that's even a phrase, but just basically starting to realize how like a lot of them seem very exploitative. They make you just very uncomfortable, and they're not doing what a documentary was meant to do in the first place, which was to educate. There's nothing wrong with being interested in true crime and watching these documentaries, and to an extent even get excited about them getting released, because, for hundreds of years, human beings have had an interest in the macabre. We've got Jack the Ripper and public executions all the way back then. But now it's getting to a point that, because we live in this era of everything gets recorded and everything gets shared, we're kind of forgetting that these are real people, these are real victims, and they have families and friends they've left behind that are going to be affected by this material. And I think The Vanishing at the Cecil Hotel really drove that point home, because it talked about the case of Elisa Lam, how it was swept up by the internet and it was made into this murder mystery, almost like a game for people to figure out what happened to her. And they just ignored the facts completely. And this documentary, in a way, kind of cleared all that up. And I think was the first time I really sat back in a while and thought, wow, it's crazy how people can get so caught up in this and genuinely forget that it's a real thing.
I think that was one of the standing out points to me about this one, because it was different to other true crime documentaries. It talked about the real world implications of the genre. Like, it was almost meta in that way.
Yeah.
It was, it was using the infamous elevator footage of Elisa Lam at the Cecil Hotel, and it was using it for the documentary whilst also discussing the impact that it had on the public at the time. So there was this weird level of like meta-ness to it.
Yeah,
very self-aware in a way that a lot of other true crime documentaries aren't. And still found it quite exploitative, but not in the same way like most are. Like you had just said, it's sometimes hard for people to remember that these were real people. I think Cecil Hotel like really goes out of its way to remind you that Elisa Lam in particular was a real person.
Yeah, even though it's one of the ones where they didn't interview any of her friends or any of her family, which we don't know. Maybe they didn't want to be involved in it, which is completely understandable. I'd obviously hope that they had the family's permission to do it.
Oh my god, yeah.
But it was one where they really talked about how people just took this story, believed they had this connection with this person they never met, and that it had to be something either supernatural or it had to be something tragic. The documentary did lead you to believe that for like the first 3 episodes. Again, I think it's almost impossible to an extent to not feel like it's completely exploiting anything, because it is still about a real person. But by the time it got to the end, it was almost kind of like a slap in the face, because it was like, this is what happened. I mean, the last episode was literally called The Hard Truth, because the facts were out there, it's just people ignored them. They didn't like the idea of it just genuinely being this really sad story of this tragic event that happened to this girl. They wanted it to be something else, to a point where they actually implicated somebody else, a musician called Morbid, who probably does have questionable material in his music, but at the end of the day, it was artistic expression. Everybody was convinced he was the killer, even after he gave proof, and they destroyed a man's life. And he was never given repercussions for that. You know, another death was nearly caused because of this whole thing.
I do think that something that was so interesting to me about this Cecil Hotel documentary was how, because it's a more recent incident, as in 2013, I think we both thought it's 2012 or 2013.
I think it was 2013 when it was reported.
It's in our recent memory, and it was in the era of social media. We've not really seen that very often yet, with a lot of high profile cases. So to see the impact of that on a murder case was fascinating. The way that people wormed their way into something so removed from them was just...
I could be totally wrong, but I'm pretty sure this probably would have been like one of the first times this happened, because even in the documentary, they briefly talk about how internet sleuths, as they've decided to call them, I don't fully agree with the term myself, but that's what they are called, have actually helped in cases. They have seen things that were unnoticed before, and this was just unfortunately not an example of that. It was the complete opposite. And I even remember, like, I'll say completely hold my hands up, and I wasn't on the internet like posting theories and getting myself involved, but when I was at uni, a friend had introduced me to the Elisa Lam case. She was like, had you ever heard about this? And I was like, no. And I found it so interesting, just because nobody claimed nobody knew what happened to her. So when this first came out, I was very interested, because I was curious as if they did have new information, and it made me realize there was no new information. It was information that was always there. It's just people looked over it.
It acts as a movie in real life for a lot of people, doesn't it? You've got that mysterious, almost surreal elevator footage. You've got this hotel with a prolific history of evil shit going on there, and it was just perfect. It was a perfect storm, and that then itself lends to making a really interesting documentary. So I think Cecil Hotel was one of those interesting, unique takes on the true crime genre, in that it doesn't just discuss the murder, it discusses like the audience participation, you know, and like that's very similar to Don't Fuck with Cats, which is entirely about audience participation.
See, I never watched that one.
I was gonna say, I know you
really
didn't.
I couldn't bring myself to do it.
It did what Cecil Hotel managed not to do. It showed a lot of stuff it shouldn't. Let's put it like that. So that felt exploitative to me. I think in another world, that one could have been done with a bit more taste. I don't know if taste is really the best word for it. It's just interesting.
But I think it's one of those ones, even without watching it, it was just... it was a case of they probably didn't even fully realize what they were doing, because they were like, this stuff's all over the internet, people can search for it themselves. But that's different. I really recommend not, but if you go out there and you search for it yourself, then that's all on you. But I just feel like when you put it into a documentary, it's a whole different thing. And I mean, there was like a whole other genre of these kind of documentaries I didn't know about until Lyanna told me about it, but The Voyeur, which is another one.
What would you call that subgenre?
I would call that completely inappropriate and should never have been done, if we can add that.
Oh my god.
I couldn't get you so The Voyeur, for anyone who hasn't seen it, because I hadn't even heard of it, is about this guy who basically bought a motel so he could peep on people. But the crazy thing is, the whole documentary is an interview with him.
It's disgusting.
The whole thing. It's all from his mouth. And it was so uncomfortable. It was so uncomfortable.
It's really important to express that the only reason this was possible was because the statute of limitations was up. He was never even done for these crimes. I think that's the most horrifying part of Voyeur, is you've got this man who was never even done for this stuff, sat in front of an entire camera crew and an interviewer who are just happily listening to his stories for the sake of a documentary. And that will never sit well with me.
But this interviewer was just as this man and this interviewer should never have met. They should never have met, because this never would have happened. The reporter himself claims to be this, I mean, he is famed. I'd never heard of him, but maybe that's just because I'm not part of that culture. But he is claimed as a legendary reporter. But the certain stories that he reported on that they spoke about in the documentary, when he went to like sex colonies and nudist colonies and free thinking whatever, which live how you want. That wasn't my issue with it. My issue with it was that he wanted to be a part of it. He was like, you can't write a story unless you're in it and you're a part of it.
Hideous.
And it was horrible, because it was like, he had a wife and kids. And again, if you're in an open relationship, that's a different thing. Didn't seem that way. Very much came across like he was using it as an excuse to do this. And he also did the same thing by putting himself in the place of the voyeur to further understand it, he claimed.
See, I've never understood that, because I've watched it twice. How did he not get done for it? I don't quite remember, because he publishes writing about it. So he's clearly accessory to a crime. How was he never? I don't quite remember those details. I think I was just so in shock. They either didn't mention it, or I was just so horrified. I
will admit, the beginning parts of it are very blurred, because I just couldn't go. At first, I genuinely thought it was a joke. Like, I didn't think it was real. And there are parts near the end where the legitimacy of the story is questioned, which made me even more uncomfortable, because the documentary framed it like you should feel sorry for the reporter, or you should feel sorry for this guy who he refers to himself as the voyeur, and I even hate that, because it makes it seem like a lifestyle and like not
prolific
a crime
and stuff.
But they make it seem like, they make you feel like you should feel sorry that now he's being questioned in his integrity. And I was like, his integrity should have been in question the whole time, because he also knew about so the voyeur's name is Gerald. I can't remember his second name, but the guy who committed the crimes is called Gerald. And apparently he knew the reporter for a long time, but because, like you said, he still could have been prosecuted, nothing was ever said, and nothing was ever published with his name. So this reporter knew for a long time. And you might be thinking, oh, he was just peeping. Yeah, that's bad enough in itself. But if that isn't enough for you, he claims to have witnessed a potential murder that he basically set up to happen, and that was never reported. It's just disgusting.
To me, that film is like the ultimate example of desensitization in the true crime genre. He himself is so desensitized. He thinks of himself as like you say, a character. He calls himself the voyeur, like in third person. And then the documentary doesn't help, because it almost elevates him to this like character. And the illusion towards like Norman Bates is ridiculous. They constantly
hugely.
And I won't lie, you would milk it. You would, because it's so obvious that the similarities are there, and that's that's an infamous figure that like audiences are aware of. So of course you're going to paint him like this character, but it's so irresponsible of the filmmaker's part to talk to him in a way that like feeds his delusion, but to just make it in the first place.
But I think it's so interesting, because there's another series called I Am a Killer that I'd never even come across until a friend had suggested it to me when I told her we're going to be recording this episode. That is a similar thing. It interviews real life killers, but oddly, the voyeur is almost more uncomfortable, because the voyeur and the reporter are both these characters within it. They have this conversation between them. They're both focused on, whereas in I Am a Killer, it is just a standard interview, and it's intercut with victims' families, and it seems, as much as it is hugely led and dramatized, it seems to try and get a more rounded story, whereas the voyeur did not. It was mainly about this guy, and it just from the beginning to the end, it was so uncomfortable. And I understand why they did it, because with all of these true crime documentaries, they're obviously interesting stories. They wouldn't be done if they weren't interesting stories. But sometimes it's the way that you go about doing it, and the voice that you're giving to these people.
I think this is an issue with making crime shows about people that are still here with us. You're opening a whole can of worms of that. It's not making a documentary about Jack the Ripper anymore, is it? It's dealing with like people's trauma whilst they're still alive and dealing with it. It is elevating people that are still around. It's it's just I don't agree with it.
But it speaks volumes that it's so crazy that you can feel just as desensitized to a Jack the Ripper story as you would to, say, like the Elisa Lam one. Even though they are obviously two drastically different stories, one is severely more recent, whereas the other almost feels like a fairy tale or a story that was created, which to an extent, obviously parts of it were created and people do get fact and fiction mixed up. But yeah, Jack the Ripper was another case where even during the time people got swept up in it and everything that went with it. But it's just mad to think how, I mean, and we've both said that we're becoming more aware now, but we were both hugely swept up in
horribly.
the genre when it like first started. And it's just mad to think that you just, it's almost like your brain forgets to separate between them.
Yeah, no, truly. And I do really want to dive into this for a minute. The whole idea of resensitizing. It's real. It's very real. And I've told you a bunch of times about my film teacher telling me it would happen. You know, you sit in a class of teenagers and they love gore. You know, they love Tarantino. They love a bit of J horror. They love it because it's still a taboo to them, which isn't quite real. Whereas as you get older and you read more real life news stories or things happen to people around you, or you just develop more empathy by going through more stuff yourself, it's not a story anymore, it's real. I like to think that for most people, but like we say, the true crime thing is kicking off like crazy. But I would say for a lot of people, yes, they become more sensitive again after their teenage years. That can make it really hard to consume that kind of media. Like I was caught up in it, like you said, you were caught up in it. When Making of a Murderer came out, of course I was all over that shit. Everybody on fucking planet Earth was. Even when Tiger King came out last year, everyone was in quarantine. It was perfect timing. Everyone went nuts. I mean, I watched it with a very much, you know, I was very much questioning what I was watching. I was a bit horrified by a lot of it.
I think that might have been the first one for me, to be honest. Like again, because, you know, it was a lockdown, you know, it was the thing that everybody was talking about. Nothing felt real. Anyway. And I remember like me and my sister watched it, then my dad watched it, and like we used to go on walks and talk about it.
Of course.
But I think it was the first one where I was like, there was something about it that, like you said, made me uncomfortable, because it was like, it was portrayed as being very comedic. You know, you were meant to laugh at this character of Joe Exotic that they had created and this feud he had with, was it Carol Baskin? All of them. There was like a war going on. But again, then when you actually say it out loud and you take away the funny visuals or the editing or whatever, it's like, oh wow, okay, this is actually a pretty fucked up story.
The thing is with Tiger King is, like we've already clarified, it was during a lockdown. There was no distractions. You were able to just binge it. And I do think that is where Netflix is doing really well with these exploitative documentaries, is that you can just watch it in one sitting. Like you don't have that time in between to question it, to think critically about it. You just blast through the season to find out more and see more. And that was definitely the case with Tiger King, because I'm pretty sure I watched it in one day. And
I think probably the same.
I think most people did. And everyone wanted to catch up and everyone wanted to talk about it, and everyone was making so many jokes. It's like, you look at that and think, what the fuck was wrong with people? Like, did we watch the same show? He was a manipulator. He was a groomer. He did a lot of things.
Because he was portrayed to be this character, this larger than life character, it didn't feel real.
Yes.
It's like, so Lyanna introduced me to this show that I would recommend watching, American Vandal. I'd never heard of it.
R.I.P.
And it's basically a show where they parody these documentaries. They take how dramatic they are. Like I've only seen the first 2 episodes so far, but I'm hooked. The first season is basically about this kid in high school who's being framed for drawing dicks on his teacher's cars, and like, it sounds crazy, it is,
but when you get into it, don't you?
But you know what, I thought it was so crazy because I was literally doing what I used to do when I used to really get into true crime documentaries, and I was literally trying to piece it together, and I was like, hold on a minute, first of all, this isn't real.
It's so brilliant, and it's so genius in that it just uses the same tools that most true crime does. They were just like, let's take the piss out of how you can take the most banal, mundane topic and make it dramatic and make you want to watch the next episode. It makes you
realize, because it is such a ridiculous story, you really do focus on, like, even like the opening credits that
so
they do
funny.
are so funny, and the text that comes up, and it's just it's hilarious.
The credits made me they made me laugh so much the first time I watched it, because they're a straight riff on Making of a Murderer, aren't they? Like the images on screen, and do you know what, the parodies of Making of a Murderer are just so much better than any true crime could be. There's that episode of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia that parodied
see, I've not watched that.
See, like one of the main characters in the show has constantly throughout like 13 seasons been referenced to be a murderer, like there's hints. So they did an episode called Making Dennis Reynolds a Murderer, and it's edited like a Making a Murderer episode, which is brilliant in the middle of a sitcom season. And it's the same as American Vandal. You just get swept up in it, and it's hilarious.
But that's just the thing. But then, like, when you again went, not to like make this comedy parody series sound deep, like we tend to seem to do with a lot of stuff, but you think about it and it's like, it's not the only thing that's been made ridiculous is the story.
Yeah.
The editing, the way they do it is the exact way it's done in true crime.
Yes.
The exact same way.
But do you know what I really enjoyed about American Vandal is the fact that so the show is framed as the criminals' classmates making this documentary, and they're supposed to be like lame AV kids who just want to like make a project, and that's brilliant to me. They just want the limelight, so they're making a shitty documentary. It's just genius. They framed it as that because that's what every true crime documentary is. It's someone who's decided to take a story and, you know, make something fantastical out of it. But what kills me even more is that American Vandal, the beginning of season 2, of course, it's a new topic, it's a new mystery. The first episode begins with a narration from the main filmmaker saying, oh, somehow our project went viral online and Netflix picked it up and now they want us to do another one. It's like, no. It's so self-aware in such a brilliant way, and it's such a tragedy that it's been cancelled.
But it's so crazy. Like, the biggest thing I can't get over is that, so Netflix know what they're doing.
Yeah, of course.
They realise the ridiculousness of it. And I mean, at the end of the day, everything's now entertainment. It just is. That is the way the world is going. So I understand why, not just true crime documentaries, but just documentaries in general are becoming like this. But then you said there is a line in the sand that needs to be drawn, because sometimes you have ones that are just way too far.
Yeah.
And I think this is going to be like maybe the bread and butter of this episode, because this is one of the main ones that me and Lyanna, and I'm sure a lot of people have watched and either not been able to make it through it, or have realised that this is pretty effed up, and it is the Night Stalker one.
It's horrible.
It's,
I finished it like an hour before starting recording this, and I've just still got those, I've got that anger in my belly. And some rum, so I'm ready to go.
I mean, if you've seen it, then I'm sure you understand what we're talking about. Even if you didn't feel the same way that we did, it is so uncomfortable to watch for so many different reasons.
I would call it tone deaf.
Yeah. It feels like a film. Like I had watched it before, and I thought to myself, oh, okay, obviously I'm going to need to watch it again to refresh before we do this. I couldn't do it. I think I said to Lyanna, I rewatched the first part of the first episode and the last part of the last episode. And I'm glad I did, just for the sole purpose of, I forgot how bad the editing is in it. And I don't mean as in like it's badly edited. I mean
it's well edited.
It makes it feel like a film. It's so removed from the source material and the fact that this was a real thing, a huge thing. They've made it so sensationalized that I couldn't get over it. I thought, okay, maybe like they did stuff like they showed the crime scene photos.
Oh my God, don't.
They went into explicit detail. They also did, like, there was this one thing that they kept showing, which was like a bloody hammer dropping to the floor. And it was just too much. It was way too much. And I don't care if their intention was to make you uncomfortable. That's not how it came across. It came across as, look at this sensationalized serial killer who at the time was sensationalized, you know, which makes it even more uncomfortable.
Yeah, you don't need to revive him. Do you know, that's what's fucked me off most about this, is people are finally like forgetting who he is, for better or for worse. And it's like, oh, suddenly let's put him in the spotlight again. Oh, top 10 on Netflix. What is the point? What's the need? I don't understand. Like, there's already countless documentaries. There's already countless information out there. If someone truly wanted to learn about Richard Ramirez and what he did, they could. So why?
I mean, he's become
do
an
it?
actual character in history.
Yeah.
He is, like, unlike a lot of other, I mean, I say unlike a lot, they do it with a lot, but he's become a staple character in, like we mentioned before, American Horror Story.
Yeah.
He's actually made into this person that, in all honesty, you know, you would probably think as like a fictional character first. But you really do forget he was a real person who did committed some of the most horrific crimes in history. And doing a documentary on him, again, wasn't the complete issue, because obviously there will be people who won't know who he is. Like me and Lyanna have briefly discussed that we have realized that because of childhoods that we had, we did read up about stuff like this, which is why I think we've come so quickly into becoming more aware of it again.
Yeah.
But the way they framed the documentary, again, like it was a film, like you were the people chasing him. They didn't even name him until the last episode.
I would like to go into some stuff about Nightstalker from like a filmmaking standpoint.
Yeah.
I really would. Like you say, they don't name him. That's a classic tension builder. If we're talking about structure, they don't mention him until the police find out the name. So, you know, it keeps you in pace with the investigation and the public.
You're not an audience. You're put in the position of the police officers,
of course.
Which, you know, again, just quickly throwing back to the Elisa Lam one, was the problem. The police gave the public too much and also not enough information, but they gave them enough information to feel like they had a right to know.
And this is what kills me, is why do they feel they have the right? Why do the public and audiences think that they are entitled to this information? They're not. Like, that was a real person that passed away. Respect people's privacy.
At the Vanishing at the Seesaw Hotel one, they actually spoke about how the public were getting aggro because the police weren't releasing the autopsy reports. And I was like, I don't understand why you think you have a right to these confidential reports.
They wanted their Sherlock moment. And they made themselves attached to her because, like we mentioned, that this is one of the first major cases in the age of social media. They felt they knew her because they had access to her Tumblr account. You know, like they felt like they had the right. In the case of someone like Richard Ramirez, it's slightly more understandable because people wanted to know how dangerous this man was and what the body count might have been, and they wanted to keep themselves safe because it was over a year that these murders were taking place. But with like the case of Elisa Lam, like, fuck off, it's none of your business. It never is. I don't know, I found like with Night Stalker, it just contributed to what would have been a big problem at the time, which was fascination. It's just regurgitating it. You know, we mentioned about how they didn't give his name till later on. They still use the name like Night Stalker, not
they
the
make
criminal.
him this villain.
They use the name the media would have.
Do you know what I was thinking during the whole time I was watching it? That if he had seen it,
he'd have loved it.
Yeah.
Oh, he would have been amazed.
And that's not why because I mean, this has always been a huge thing. Like you've seen it in like the Ted Bundy case, or in I can't remember his full name, but there was another English case where a reporter had gone to interview the killer, and they want the notoriety. That's what they want from it. That's why they do it. That's, you know, I mean, obviously not always, but most of the time when it's like that and it goes on for that long, that is why they do it. And that's why you need to be so careful when you're making something like this. And the Night Stalker one just completely missed the mark. I can't believe that there would have been people who would watch that and thought, yeah, that's cool, send it on.
It just felt icky. I agree with you. It's making a celebrity out of them. I think the moment I truly thought this is fucked was at the end of the first episode when the logo came on screen, and it was like and it was like this, like, you know, like 80s guitar led rhythm, and I was just like, no,
it does the same thing, like
here.
Right at the end. I said to Lyanna that I don't know why, but for some reason I thought it ended with like a black screen of all the victims' names. Obviously that must have been another one I watched, because it did just end with the Night Stalker, and then it went to credits, and I was like, I feel like I've just watched a film, but I know that it's real. And it's so uncomfortable. And one of the biggest things that stood out to me, I mean, there's so much in it that would stand out to you, but that I remembered quite vividly from it was there's a reporter whose name I can't remember, and even if I did, I wouldn't want to give the name, but there's a reporter in it that they interview constantly throughout. And there was a point during the case where I think they said the biggest thing that they had on him was a shoe print, that was like all the scenes, and they quite smartly did not reveal that to the general public, because otherwise all he had to do was change his shoes and they were fucked. This reporter somehow found out this information, and she called up the police and said, basically, I have this information, if you don't give me something better, I'm going to release it. And they were like, you're going to fuck up the whole case if you do this. She was like, I don't care. And that was just basically what this whole episode is about, is just the complete disregard for the fact that this is a real thing. It's not this sensationalized case for you to report. It's a real thing that happened. And if after the fact people want to learn about it because they either want the victims' stories to be told because they deserve to be told, they deserve to be remembered, or because they want to use it as a cautionary tale, which a lot back then, that's what a lot of that would have been, because people didn't really think people like this existed.
No. I think we know it now. Why do we keep needing these reminders and these shows and these films? Like, can't we put it to bed? Like, I know the demand is always going to be there. It's never going to stop. And I'm not going to lie, of course, I'm going to watch them in the future. So I am a hypocrite. I'll admit that. But yeah, it's getting tiring now, isn't it?
But I think, like we said, it's not just, I mean, obviously it will sound hypocritical, but there's a way to do it. Like, you know, the ones like the Vanishing at Cecil Hotel is one thing. And then you go all the other way to the end of the scale with Night Stalker. There are ways to do it, and ironically, even though there are also examples of how not to do it, YouTube is one way people are finding to put these cases out there and not be completely disrespectful. Like, yes, it is an example of people feeling like they have a right to the information. But for some reason, I've seen a lot more YouTubers handle these cases more sensitively than documentaries. And maybe that's just because I don't actively want to search for ones that I know won't.
See, this is where we differ, because my experience of all this is BuzzFeed Unsolved, which, don't get me wrong, lots of fans of. But at the end of the day, it is a fucking BuzzFeed series. And Beauty Gurus. And I just can't stand behind it. I know that's not everyone, but they have painted a brush over the entire true crime community for me. They truly have, because and also true crime podcasts, a lot of them are hideous, and I know it sounds horrible. Actually, no, whatever. To generalize, a lot of that area is dominated by white women, because I think there is a barrier, you know. We see it in film as well quite often, and that's a complete other topic, so I won't dive deeply into it, but it's really horrible to see these like very privileged people make entertainment fodder out of a serious topic and real people's lives and trauma. And that is what these documentaries are as well. But I think there's just something to me a bit more gross about someone sticking on a camera and
like
a
the
makeup,
average Joe doing it.
And a makeup look, and just filming their personal thoughts on it.
See, those ones, like I said, I obviously I know they're out there. I've never watched them because I completely agree. I don't understand it. I don't get how you, like you said, you can do this normal everyday thing. But then that is, you know, part of the problem, the reason we're doing this podcast, that it is just becoming people's everyday rhetoric, and like they talk about it in conversation and are not, again, thinking about the names that they're uttering are real people that have had to suffer through these horrific things. But I do think that, I guess it's just because I think if people are going to go and actively seek these things out, because you will, like I said, we will, you know, but we want to look for the ones that aren't exploiting, that are genuinely trying to tell the story. Because human beings are always going to be obsessed with like the macabre. It's the whole idea of wound culture and surveillance state, and the fact that, you know, because of social media now, we are exposed to so much violence that it makes us immune to the horror of it. And I just have come across some YouTubers that I think, not so much before, like I think people have had to grow, because people do, like, there's nothing, I mean, obviously you don't want to make the mistake in the first place, but at the end of the day, we're human, we are going to make the mistakes, but they're growing and learning. And there are a lot of YouTubers who are now, they're not profiting off the videos. They're making a point of making sure that it goes to the right people. They're actually inviting in the victims who want to speak. Sometimes they don't even want to talk about the case. They just want to talk about this family member or this friend that meant so much to them, but nobody knows these things about them because all people care about is the crime.
Yeah.
So I think there's room for improvement, and I honestly think we're going to get it more believe it or not, from social media than I think we are from Netflix documentaries, because Netflix documentaries are always going to want to entertain. They're always going to want to shock. They're always going to want to be the hashtag and the thing that you're tweeting about. Whereas there are some genuine people out there that find things interesting and they want to give the right kind of exposure.
Yeah, it's very difficult for these people as well, though, to find a line, isn't it?
Yeah,
I completely agree with you. Some people do it with really good intentions, but then you get people like shown in Hotel Cecil and Don't Fuck with Cats who involve themselves in these cases and can actually do really big damage to
more harm.
Yeah, exactly. And I like what you say about some of them just talking to victims and relatives, because I think that's something that is really often forgotten in particularly Netflix documentaries. They don't care. They don't.
No.
And even when they do, it feels fucked up. We had said in our conversation before recording how we were horrified by the people behind the Night Stalker doc's decision to include family members talking about people's murder whilst including images on top. That is
I said to Lyanna, I genuinely want to know what they said to these people. Like, what brief did they send these people that was like, because I can't imagine having something that horrific touch my life, then being asked to talk about it, whether I want to or not. Because Lyanna did make a really good point before that sometimes these people, like you said, they need the money that comes from it.
Yeah.
Sometimes they don't know what else to do with their lives because they need people to be talking about this. But to talk about something like this and then, like you said, it be overlapped and spliced with these
hideous,
very horrible pictures that you don't want to see. Why would you want everybody else to see them?
Yeah.
There's a reason they're crime scene photos. Then they were never made for the public to see.
No. It's so fucked up on so many levels. And I said a minute ago about Night Stalker being fucked up on a filmmaking level. I've always thought of documentaries as having like a few tricks up their sleeves. They can do talking heads, which is of course sat down interviews. They can include archive footage or images, and they can include recreations. And I'm sure there's more stuff, but those seem to be like the three main components of a documentary. And the way they put these together in this are hideous. They'll have a poor girl talking about her grandmother as a person, and then they will cut in between it images of her dead body and recreation B-roll of a mysterious man in the shadows walking towards a house. And it's like, how can you put that over a woman talking about this person who was so important in her life, and just then on top of that add visuals which just reduce them to their murder?
It's so uncomfortable.
It's like, I just can't wrap my head around it. Like,
I think
they had to
having
film
this
that
discussion,
B-roll and they had to edit it in. It's so fucked up.
I think having this discussion has actually made me realize the biggest issue with it all is that if you are creating this documentary to create this character out of this real life criminal as a villain, as the Night Stalker one is probably one of the worst examples I have seen thus far, then that's where you need to step back and rethink it and realize that you're not doing this to tell the victim's story. I mean, Lyanna even brought up the fact that in the Night Stalker one, they have this like buddy cop narrative going on. And it's like, that made me uncomfortable, and I couldn't really voice why it made me uncomfortable. But but like you said, it's because it is a narrative that is used in film, in fiction.
It was given Lethal Weapon.
Yeah.
It was horrible.
It was
yeah, they were playing it as like the unexpected duo, the hardened old detective and the young Latino guy off the street. And it was just like,
yeah, because
I get why, like, you're adding context, but you can't then put that with, I don't know, you can, of course you can put it with other stuff, but it was just horrible to see them making like a joke out of this and be like, we went for drinks, we were the unexpected duo, and then literally 2 seconds later have a girl talking about being, horrible stuff happening to her. I'm trying not to go into details because I really don't want to. It's too grotesque.
I think with this one, it was like, the reason I think that narrative was so uncomfortable was because, yeah, you're right, they can put in context, and sometimes it is nice when they put in context like that that's not completely about the crime, but the only reason they did it is because they were creating a story.
Yeah,
that's the only reason they did it. So they had, in the beginning, they portrayed these heroes, and then they had the villain, and then they had the victims. That's what all of this was. It was it was very uncomfortable from start to finish.
It's like, I think what's happened is Night Stalker almost feels like making a murderer on drugs. like on steroids.
Mm.
You know, it took what worked with that and everything that Netflix has learned people like since, and it just chopped them all together and made this grotesque Frankenstein of like a true crime documentary. And it's such a poor excuse, because all of the actual information that you got out of that 4-hour series could have probably been put in a film, in a single film. I came out of it knowing I learned things, but I didn't actually learn that much about the investigation and the victims. You know what I mean? It was like,
it was also very repetitive. Like you said,
it just talked about him a lot.
Yeah, the only reason they put it into a series was because it would get more of a following. Like you'd be like, oh, the next episode needs to
more
click.
Conversation too.
Whereas you're completely right. They could have put it into like an hour and 30, hour and 20 documentary of all the relevant information without any of the drama.
Yeah.
If you found that boring, then whatever, because at the end of the day, that is what documentaries started out being and should still be.
I know, like, there's been so many over the years now. I think one of the best ones, which I don't think we've actually spoken about yet, is the Madeleine Mccann one. That one to me was...
I don't think I've actually watched that one.
That one was
because I was worried it was going to be really uncomfortable to watch.
So it clearly has its suspicions about the parents, but it doesn't do what it does to like Richard Ramirez. Obviously Richard Ramirez was proven guilty, so it's a bit different on that front, but it doesn't like paint these demons out of suspects or anything. It more coldly states facts, and it shows like diagrams of the layout of the building, so you can actually get a sense of the events and the case, which is much more what I would have preferred out of Night Stalker. But then also when you think about that, doesn't that then make everything feel cold and detached and not real?
Maybe we should just stop talking about serial killers. I realise that's not going to happen.
I think that's the problem, isn't it? We're so fascinated by them because they don't listen to what society expects of them, and they commit the ultimate crime multiple times. So there's this fantasy built around them.
But
you had mentioned that they're like adults versions of monsters, like the boogeyman and monsters under the bed, you know.
I mean, I read like really briefly about, I mean, this is a vicious cycle, and one that I don't think we're ever going to break. I wouldn't even say this episode is us trying to break it. No, it's just us putting our views out, in all honesty, just maybe trying to speak into existence a slightly more sensitive Netflix. But yeah, like people have spoken about how obviously we've always had this fascination with horror and mystery and just, you know, the dark corners of the world, because it's usually your average Joe that, you know, like us, that is interested in it, because it's not something that affects our lives every day. And the issue, like I said, the issue doesn't always come from the interest. It comes from how it is being consumed.
Yes.
So like the Vanishing at the Cecil Hotel was, I mean, we have different opinions on it. I thought it was quite interesting because it revealed a lot more than, like, say, the Night Stalker one. But I guarantee you people will say the Night Stalker one was better. It was more interesting because it had action.
More
it had
engaging.
This.
Yeah. I did get more out of the Cecil Hotel one because it actually made you sit back and question your own actions. And the way you consume media. And I think the ones like the Cecil Hotel are the ones people really need to be talking about more than the Night Stalker one. You know, like,
hugely.
I'm just going to put a request out there. Can people stop asking me excitedly if I've seen the latest Netflix true crime show, because I think it's gross. Like, I walk into work and people are like, oh my God, have you seen Night Stalker? Oh my God, it's so interesting. It was so good. Like, please don't do that. Like, is a serial killer at the end of the day. Real people died. I understand the excitement because it's made to make you excited, but I think people need to be more critical, and that only comes with more exposure and empathy. So you can't just expect someone that got suggested Nightcrawler on their Netflix homepage to be like, oh, I think this was poorly made and edited and really cruel. Like, it's designed for them to consume it and get excited about it. The only way we can like expect people to think and feel differently about these is by also demanding more from the creators and from Netflix as a platform. I think the change needs to come from like all fronts, you know?
Yeah, we all need to make an active decision. Yeah. I think that's a really good point, because in all honesty, this, like I said, this episode that we're doing isn't to call anybody out or, you know, to tell people what they should consume or shouldn't consume. Like, I don't think at any point we've said don't watch this or do watch this.
No, yeah.
I would if I had to say, I would prefer if people didn't watch Night Stalker and give it praise that people are.
You say that, but then in some ways I would want people to watch it to know why certain approaches are fucked up, if that makes sense. Like, to watch it as a learning opportunity rather than as entertainment.
No, yeah, I suppose you're right.
No, like, I completely get you. Like, if people were talking about, I think it's watching it excitedly for fun, I'd be like, please don't.
I feel like it's a shame because either you're going to watch it and you're going to feel uncomfortable, and I don't want people to feel uncomfortable, or either you're going to watch it and maybe not see why there are issues with it, and then that also upsets me.
Yeah.
So I think, like, either way.
Yeah.
But no, you are right. I mean, the reason that we watched the ones that we have was for this episode, because we couldn't talk about it unless we had seen them and we were educated enough on the material we were talking about. But you're right. I think there needs to be a shift in the way the creators are approaching this material. And I think, obviously, I don't know if it's going to happen. I don't know if people are going to kind of go, all right, this one was a bit too far. And I think it is very difficult at the moment, like we said right at the beginning when we started talking about Tiger King, that during a lockdown when all you want to do is just mindlessly consume media, it's difficult to be like, oh, this actually wasn't okay, because everything's just blurring literally into one. You'll watch it and then you'll go and make dinner.
See, this is the thing about Netflix, is it's just entertainment. They're just pumping it out. And if people are watching something, they will continue to make more of it. That's all they do. As we're seeing with, say, like, updated versions of like cartoons at the minute, that's their thing right now, is they will hop on whatever seems to be trending with people, and your hate watch contributes to a watch. Like, it becomes a stat. So we have not helped in that way, so I kind of regret that. But it's not like the end of the world like we're painting it out to be. It's just Netflix has a responsibility to like frame it differently. We're coming near the end of this episode now, but something I do want to point out is two better things I've seen in recent years. Other people might not agree with me. The Britney one and Finding Neverland. Both have their issues for sure. Of course, with Finding Neverland, we have the issue of the antagonist.
The whole situation.
He's not alive. And with Framing Britney, she's not involved. But they felt far more like actual documentaries to me. They were actually stating facts. And there's probably a big part of that is because they weren't made by Netflix. So that's
true. I mean, Netflix does fall under the curse of it is the majority streaming platform that everybody uses, so I fully understand it needs to stay entertaining. I just don't think true crime is where they should be putting all of their flashy editing and entertaining into.
I agree, because look at all the Tiger King merch. That just sums it up, doesn't it? All the birthday cards, all the Halloween costumes. It was crazy.
Everything. It was literally a historical movement.
No, it was, because whenever people think of 2020, they're going to think of like COVID, Tiger King. I do think they will think of Tiger King. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say.
Oh no, well, they already were. Like you like you said, you look at the merch that came out and you look at the memes that happened, and it was like 2020 in a nutshell, and Tiger King's there.
Yeah. People who have never even watched it have heard the names Joe Exotic and Carol Baskin, which I think says everything, really. And we said Night Stalker was the worst, but now I think about it, I actually think Tiger King was worse because he's still alive. You know what I mean? And
I suppose,
people are making merch about that. They're not making merch about Night Stalker. There's those weirdos on Tumblr, don't get me wrong, who like, have shrines to like serial killers and Richard Ramirez. But, it's not everyday people thinking it's funny to wear a Tiger King t-shirt.
I wonder if, though, it's because Tiger King is not as cut and dry as like Richard Ramirez is. Like, he is a serial killer. There is no debate about it. Yeah. He was convicted. Whereas Tiger King, people arguably said it brought up, the morals of, like just everything he was doing. Yeah. So I wonder if it's a mixture of that, the fact that, like you said, it's more topical. I think they're as bad as each other. They're just different examples.
That's true. Yeah. I could say, you definitely agree with that, actually. They're equally as bad in different ways. I think, we're drawing this episode to a close now. It's been super interesting to talk about because as we're talking about this, I'm realizing how many fucking examples there are in just the last, 4 years. It's crazy. The next episode, we're going to be talking about not just the true crime documentaries, but the fiction inspired by these cases.
Yeah, we're covering everything.
Oh, yes.
I think it's because we could literally go on for hours talking about this. Yeah. And I would love to hear other people's views. Like, this isn't us calling anybody out or criticizing what people watch. At the end of the day, we're all, well, I assume we're all adults. You know, we're all, you can watch whatever you want. It's just there are higher ends of the scale of stuff that it's kind of like, I don't really know what you're getting from it if you're able to see kind of how morally wrong it is and how dangerous it can be. And I also think this episode was just also a way for us to kind of start talking about how if you're getting older, like we are, and you're starting to be affected by stuff again that you never have before, you're not on your own. You can turn around and go, this thing that I was praising and talking about and saying how cool it was this time last year, I don't think that anymore. Like, that's okay. There's nothing, like, people will tell you you're, like, Lyanna kept calling herself a hypocrite. I don't think it's being a hypocrite, because you're going to change, you're going to grow. And I think that's what a lot of these documentaries are showing us, that there is a line between the interest and being so desensitized that you just forget that these are real people at the end of the day.
Like I said, I get co-workers now asking me if I've seen these things, and it's making me realize that although these have been popular for years, it is now reaching a mainstream. So they were always big amongst people that were drawn to that stuff, but now it's becoming popular amongst like every audience member, which is kind of freaky, because when my co-worker asked me if I'd seen Night Stalker, I was like, oh, it's about Richard Ramirez, isn't it? He's like, how do you know who that is? And I realized, oh my God, he was introduced to him because of this documentary. And man, I don't think I've ever been so like horrified by a Netflix thing. I really don't.
Oh, that's so
really
true.
Really gross to me.
Yeah, for that to be your introduction.
Yeah, like
to
this,
it,
like,
yeah.
I don't know, like, just to like kind of sign off this episode, I want to say that I feel much more comfortable with fictional portrayals of stuff, because there's that sense of detachment and you're basing a fictional character on someone that did exist, but you're not heightening their celebrity status. And I think that's why maybe next episode I might seem less angry and like more interested, because this topic does piss me off. It does, because
it's passionate, it's not angry.
Well, a bit of both. But when we were playing this episode, we were talking about both. It became very clear very quickly. There's so many examples. So I don't know about you, but I'm quite excited for the next one, which will of course not be until the end of next month. Yeah, you have to wait a month for that one.
But it'll be worth it.
Yeah, for sure.
Enjoy this one for now.
I like how like we might have contributed. Now people are like, oh, that sounds interesting.
Do you know what? When I was scripting this, I was like, ooh, I think we're literally going to be doing what? But you know what? Like Lyanna said, if you're going to go ahead and watch them, because at the end of the day, you need to make up your own mind about it. Yeah. These are just our opinions. Yeah, okay, there are certain ones that I don't think it's an opinion. I do think it's quite obvious that they were not okay. But a lot of them do have that grey area of it's what you're comfortable with. And it's not even just what you're comfortable with. It's like you put yourself in that situation, in that family situation. If you would be comfortable with it, then okay, that's your opinion, that's your choice.
So true.
Yeah. And I think that's it. I think we've said everything that we can.
Yeah, I think that's a wrap from me and from you, because I think if we went on, we'd just be repeating ourselves and going in circles.
We'll just fade out, because I don't think we're ever going to have an outro for these things.
I like a fade out, it seems classy.